When a shy black student cracks an AP-level math problem in seconds, the teacher accuses him of cheating. But the truth? He's been secretly teaching himself for years. What happens next will expose more than talent. It'll shake the whole system. Watch how silence becomes revolution. Thursday morning math class at Crest Hill Middle School dragged on as slowly as ever. Soft sunlight filtered to the classroom windows, falling across the whiteboard covered in mathematical symbols. Symbols most students barely glanced at, let alone understood. The heavy air of the room was a blend of chalk dust, worn-out paper, and quiet sighs of resignation. Jaden Carter, a 13-year-old boy, sat silently at the back of the class. With his warm brown skin, deep eyes, and small frame, Jaden was practically invisible to most people, except for Ms. Veronica Hale, the math teacher. With her tightly pinned hair and lips that rarely knew the shape of a smile, was infamous for her strict demeanor, biting sarcasm, and her clear distaste for students who lacked discipline. To her, Jaden was exactly that kind of student. "Jaden Carter," Ms. Hale suddenly called out, her shrill voice slicing through the classroom's gloom like a blade. Heads turned. A few students snickered. Jaden looked up, shoulders tensing slightly. "Stand up. If you don't care to sit and learn like everyone else, I assume you're smart enough to solve this." She turned to the board, slashing the marker across it, scribbling a long and winding set of equations. "This is a problem from 11th grade AP Calculus," she added, her voice dripping with mockery. "But I figured today we'd test a math genius sitting in the back row." Jaden didn't move. His heart pounded like each number on the board was a spear pointed straight at his chest. A cocktail of nerves and anger churned in him. But behind the fear was something else. A cold clarity, honed through countless nights spent buried in textbooks at the public library. He stepped forward. Each step felt like cutting through fog, laced with judgmental stares. He didn't ask permission, didn't look around. He simply reached for the marker. Silence. The quiet hum of the marker gliding across the whiteboard began to break the dead space in the room. Jaden wrote line by line, each step of his reasoning unfolding. There was no rush, no performance. Just pure logic, clear, methodical, exact. As if his brain were gliding smoothly along a track only he could see. A few students leaned forward. The smirks faded. Ms. Hale's triumphant grin began to melt into something closer to confusion. 3 minutes later, Jaden lowered the marker. He double underlined the answer, turned around, and looked straight at the class. Not a sound. A boy near the front muttered under his breath, He actually solved it." Ms. Veronica Hale stood frozen in front of the board, her eyes glued to Jaden's work. The lips that were always ready with a sarcastic jab now sealed in stunned silence. She scanned the final answer, then traced backward through each line, trying, perhaps desperately, to find mistake. There wasn't one. "Where did you learn this?" she finally asked, her voice missing its usual sharpness. Jaden simply shook his head slightly. "I taught myself." A wave of whispers began to ripple through the classroom. One student near the front turned around. "Is he for real?" Meanwhile, Ms. Hale stood frozen, her face flushed red, fingers clenched tightly around the marker as if she might snap it in two. But Jaden didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He simply walked back to his seat, his gaze calm and steady, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, his heart was pounding. Because for the first time, the very first time, he wasn't hiding behind the invisible outline others had drawn for him. Jaden's real story hadn't started that Thursday morning in math class. It began on countless quiet evenings at the Fairlawn Public Library. While other kids played video games or gathered at the mall, Jaden would strap on his worn-out backpack and quietly walk past 2 rows of townhomes to the city library, where soft golden light and silence always welcomed him. Back again, Jaden? Ms. Emily, the elderly librarian with snow-white hair, would smile warmly as he stepped through the door. Math corner still in the same spot. Jaden would nod, then slip away to the small desk tucked in the corner, where he could face the world of numbers all on his own. His love for math had sparked when he was just 8, helping his dad measure with planks to build a bookshelf. Math is the language of the universe, his father had told him. You don't need anyone to validate it. If you understand it and love it, that's enough. Jaden's family didn't have much. His dad was a mechanic. His mom worked night shifts at Crestview General Hospital. The small apartment they lived in had 2 modest bedrooms and a basic kitchen. There was no money for tutoring, no budget for advanced textbooks. But somehow, that made Jaden even more determined. He taught himself everything, from free online videos to borrowed college textbooks. He devoured calculus problems, explored integrals and derivatives, dove headfirst into Euler's theorem like it was a game where only he knew the rules. He didn't brag. No one at school knew. To his teachers, Jaden was just a quiet black kid who often came to class late and kept his head down in the back row. But today, everything was different. Today, the way the class looked at him had started to shift. The silence after Jaden's solution still hung in the air when Ms. Hale abruptly spoke again. Her voice was sharper than before, almost shrill, like she was trying to reclaim control over the room. "Impressive," she said through tight lips. "But next time, if you're planning to put on a show, follow directions first. I won't have anyone standing like they're the center of attention." Jaden stayed quiet. He knew what would happen if he pushed back. Ms. Hale wasn't a forgiving type, especially not when made to look small in front of her own class. But what truly unsettled Jaden wasn't her words. It was that look in her eyes, the same one she'd had a week ago. The look that meant something had already started. That day, Jaden had been called aboard to solve a geometry problem. He fumbled, forgot a formula, and instead of guidance, he was humiliated in front of the entire class. Ms. Hale didn't just berate him with harsh words. In a moment of explosive anger, she struck him across the back 3 times with a ruler. "Say the formula again." "You slow little brat," she screamed. Snickers came from the back row. Jaden didn't cry. He just stood there, gripping the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles turned white, doing everything he could not to collapse from the pain. After school, he walked toward the nurse's office, but turned back halfway. He was afraid. Who would believe a quiet black boy with average grades, already on the radar for being late to class? Yet he said that the respected Miss Veronica Hale had hit him. He went home and hid his shirt behind his back, telling his mom he fell down the stairs. She looked at him longer than usual, but didn't ask more. His father still hadn't come home from the garage. The bruises spread slowly across his back, making it impossible for Jaden to sit for a week. He asked to stand during class, and every time he did, Ms. Hale turned it into a joke, like she had that morning. "Jaden, I didn't give you permission to sit yet," she said, her voice cold. Jaden didn't respond. He gripped the strap of his backpack tighter, eyes locked on the whiteboard like it was the only thing holding him upright. Sweat trickled down his spine, stinging the unhealed bruises. But he didn't flinch. Not today. Not after everything that had just happened. Then a small voice rose from the back of the classroom. He got it right. Every head turned. It was Aaliyah, the quiet girl in the last row, who almost never spoke in class. "Why are you mad?" He got it right. The room froze. For the first time, a student had stood up to Ms. Hale. And Jaden, he couldn't quite believe it, felt something ease in his chest. Even if it was just one voice, even if it was just one person, he wasn't entirely alone anymore. Ms. Hale stood frozen for a few seconds. Then, without a word, she snatched a sheet of paper with Jaden's solution and stormed toward the door. "The principal will deal with this," she said coldly. "Bring your backpack, Jaden." Jaden nodded silently. He bent down, picked up his backpack from under the desk, clutching it tightly to his chest like a shield, and walked to the silent aisle between desks. As he left, whispers stirred, soft and uncertain, but no one laughed. No one dared. The classroom door clicked shut behind him. Minutes later, the principal's office door swung open. Principal Richard Monroe looked up from his desk. Jaden stepped in, backpack still clutched to his chest like armor. He tried not to show pain as he sat down in the wooden chair across from the desk. Ms. Hale followed close behind, her face as hard as stone, gripping the scribbled worksheet like a weapon. "Principal Monroe," Ms. Hale said sharply, slapping the worksheet down on the desk. "This student has disrupted class, refused to follow instructions, and has clearly committed academic dishonesty on a college-level math problem. There's no way he solved this on his own. He must have had unauthorized help. Principal Monroe frowned. Jaden, do you have anything to say? Jaden swallowed hard, his throat dry. I didn't cheat, sir. I just solved the problem. Solved a calculus-level problem while maintaining AC in math? Ms. Hale cut in. An 8th grader cannot do that. Not alone. Jaden lifted his head for the first time and met the skeptical eyes of the 2 adults in the room. I taught myself, he said. I read books at the public library every week. I study calculus textbooks. I watch videos online. I never told anyone because... Because what? Ms. Hale raised an eyebrow, her voice laced with sarcasm. Because you wanted to cause drama in class? Or because you knew you'd get caught and decided to act innocent first? Jaden clutched the strap of his backpack tighter. No, because I knew if I told the truth, no one would believe me. The room went still. Principal Monroe exhaled slowly, clearly conflicted. Jaden, I understand you're under pressure, but you have to understand, faking answers or using outside materials during class is a serious violation. Unless we have clear evidence, it's hard for me to believe. A knock interrupted him. The door opened, and in walked Ms. Naomi Brooks, the young, well-respected science teacher known for her empathy and sharp intuition. Sorry to interrupt, she said, stepping forward, her eyes landing on Jaden with firm but gentle resolve. But I just heard about this from a student in the hallway, and I need to speak. She moved directly to the principal's desk, standing beside Jaden. Jaden Carter is one of my students, she said clearly. He once turned in a biology model project that used advanced simulation formulas. There were differential equations in there, content far beyond the 8th grade curriculum. When I asked where he learned them, he said, I taught myself. Principal Monroe's eyes narrowed. He submitted that project? Yes, Ms. Brooks nodded. I still have a copy. He's not talkative, but his logic is years ahead of his peers. She turned to Jaden. Do you still have those notebooks you showed me that day? Jaden nodded slowly, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Naomi's voice grew firmer. I won't stand by and watch a student get punished for being extraordinary. Principal Monroe sat straighter in his chair, clearly reconsidering. He glanced at Ms. Hale, whose lips were now pressed into a thin, pale line. All right, he said calmly. We'll arrange for an independent assessment. If he truly has the ability, it'll show. And for the first time, Jaden didn't feel alone in the fight for the truth. The room fell into silence after Ms. Naomi Brooks' bold declaration. Principal Monroe's hands tightened into a soft grip on the desk, his gaze settling on Jaden, the 13-year-old boy with eyes as deep and still as a lake after rain. But it was the silence that held him. There was something deeper, heavier, being hidden beneath the surface. Jaden, Ms. Brooks said gently as she stepped closer, can you show me your back? Jaden flinched, stepping back slightly. Why? You don't need to be afraid, she whispered. Just trust me. Principal Monroe frowned. Ms. Brooks, how is this relevant to? Sir, she cut in sharply, her voice unexpectedly firm. Last week, I noticed Jaden wince when he tried to sit down in the lab. He said he'd fallen down the stairs, but I didn't believe it. Jaden stared at the floor tiles, his fingers gripping the strap of his backpack, so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jaden, Ms. Naomi asked again, this time her voice more like a promise than a question. Did someone at school cause that injury? The air grew so heavy you could hear a pin drop. Jaden gave a small nod. Just once. Barely a movement. But it was enough to shatter the walls he'd built to protect himself. Principal Monroe shot up from his chair. Ms. Hale, I'm going to have to ask you to leave this room immediately. These are serious allegations. This is ridiculous. Veronica Hale snapped, though her eyes had begun to waver. He's making this up. There's no proof. We'll determine that, Monroe replied calmly, already dialing for the school nurse. Right now. 10 minutes later, the school nurse, Mrs. Helen, arrived and escorted Jaden into a private room for examination. As the door clicked shut behind them, Naomi Brooks turned to the principal. I've been teaching for 10 years, she said, and I know what real fear looks like in a child's eyes. Jaden has a gift that most kids his age don't, and he's been living in fear, not just from being hurt, but from the fear that no one would ever believe him. Principal Monroe sighed and leaned back in his chair. He was no longer just an administrator overseeing a middle school. He was facing a deep fracture in the system he once believed was solid. A few minutes later, Mrs. Helen returned. Her eyes were red, and her face was tight with restrained emotion. She nodded toward Naomi, then turned to Principal. There are marks consistent with blunt force from a long, rigid object. Bruising is still present. The pattern is highly indicative of a wooden ruler. At that moment, Ms. Hale could no longer defend herself. Panic began to rise in her eyes like thin smoke from a room where a fire had just sparked. I just wanted him to follow the rules, she stammered. You cross a line, Principal Monroe said, his voice cold. I'll be reporting this to the district office immediately. You are hereby suspended pending investigation. Jaden stepped out of the nurse's office, shoulders trembling slightly, but this time he didn't hang his head. He looked straight at Ms. Hale, the teacher who once made him flinch at every class, with a calm, unwavering gaze. And it wasn't the testimony or the evidence that shook her. It was that look. That look made her afraid. For the first time, the next morning, the air at Crest Hill Middle School was tight as a drawn bowstring. News of Jaden's ordeal had spread through the halls like wildfire. Students whispered at their lockers. Teachers avoided each other's eyes in the lounge. But inside the principal's office, an unprecedented decision was taking shape. We're going to administer an independent evaluation, Principal Monroe announced, eyes locked on Jaden, seated across from him. Fair, transparent. If you're as capable as Ms. Brooks believes, this is your chance to prove it. Jaden gave a small nod. Inside, a war was raging between anxiety and resolve. He wasn't afraid of the math. He was afraid that no matter how right he was, they still wouldn't see him. The exam was set for 10 a.m., held in the library under direct supervision of Principal Monroe, Ms. Naomi Brooks, and outside math teacher from a neighboring high school, Mr. Roy Jonathan. I'll be creating the test myself, Mr. Jonathan stated. 5 problems, covering everything from algebra to calculus. Each one requires deep understanding, not just memorized formulas. Jaden walked into the room with only a number 2 pencil and a basic scientific calculator. No notes, no books. No one was allowed to speak to him during the exam. At exactly 10 o'clock, Principal Monroe placed the test in front of him. You have 2 hours. Attempt whichever problems you feel confident in. Jaden scanned the questions. Parametric equations, inequalities, integration by parts. He took a deep breath. Then he began to write. At first, just a few scratch lines. But then, the pencil moved with rhythm. The math flowed like music. Each expression laid down with clarity. Each step concise, deliberate. No extra strokes. No mistakes. After just 40 minutes, Jaden raised his hand and asked for more paper. Principal Monroe checked the clock, then handed him 2 more sheets. Beside him, Mr. Jonathan leaned forward, watching closely, his brow furrowing not in suspicion but in astonishment. This boy, he's using substitution methods for integration, he whispered. And did he just solve that with a Taylor expansion? Ms. Brooks smiled just slightly. Exactly 78 minutes in, Jaden put his pencil down. On the table lay 6 pages, filled edge to edge with clean, precise handwriting. Each problem solved not once, but twice. One solution used the classic method, the other a creative, alternate approach. Principal Monroe picked up the packet, pausing before even flipping the first page. The handwriting was neat, orderly, almost like a letter being penned, not an advanced calculus exam. Are you sure you don't want to review it one more time? He asked. Jaden looked him straight in the eye. I'm sure. For the first time since setting foot in Crest Hill Middle School, Jaden didn't flinch. He didn't bow his head. He didn't apologize for being exactly who he was. Because this time, no one could tear up his work. No one could smear his numbers. No one could turn his talent into something shameful. Within 24 hours, the atmosphere at Crest Hill had completely shifted. Teachers whispered about the historic test. Students secretly pass around typed-up copies of Jaden's work, posted on the faculty server by none other than Principal Monroe, who had ordered it to be verified by multiple staff. By midday the following day, the entire faculty was summoned to the library. Principal Monroe stood at the podium, a stack of papers in hand, his expression serious, yet undeniably bright with hope. "Colleagues," he began, "Jaden Carter has completed an advanced mathematics evaluation with results none of us could have predicted." He scanned the room slowly. Not only were all answers correct, but he also provided alternate solutions, some using techniques not taught until college-level calculus. In the back row, Ms. Hale sat stone still. Her once sharp expression had stiffened into something unreadable, no longer hiding the turmoil behind it. But the surprises weren't over. The library doors swung open. An elderly man with a tall frame, tidy silver hair, and a calm, commanding presence stepped inside, briefcase in hand. It was Professor Isaac Coleman, a leading expert in applied mathematics from Franklin University, and someone Ms. Brooks had contacted the night before. "Apologies for the delay," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I received a scanned copy of the student's test at 2 a.m. I've read it 3 times. The room fell utterly silent. "This is not merely a correct test," Professor Coleman continued. "This is mathematical brilliance. In Problem 4, the student used a variable substitution method typically seen in second-year engineering courses." He looked around the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have here is a rare mathematical mind." Ms. Hale stirred, about to speak, but Professor Coleman raised a hand gently to stop her. "I'm not here to debate. I'm here to confirm Jaden Carter is a phenomenon who deserves structured, intentional academic investment. And if this school doesn't provide it, Franklin will." Gasps rippled through the room like a wave. At the back, just inside the library doorway, Jaden stood frozen, barely able to believe what he was hearing. Immediately after the faculty meeting, Principal Monroe personally called Jaden and his parents into his office. On the table was a special academic proposal, accompanied by a formal written apology. "We were wrong," he said, voice low but steady. "Not only did we fail to believe in you, we allowed you to be hurt, physically and emotionally. Ms. Hale has been suspended pending investigation." Jaden's parents sat in silence for a long moment. Then his mother reached over and squeezed his hand. Her eyes were glassy, red from emotion, but glowing with fierce pride. Jaden still didn't say a word. He just stared at the new academic plan. 3 weekly advanced math courses at the local university, personal mentorship from Professor Coleman, and full academic sponsorship from the school. This wasn't just an apology. It was a door opening to an entirely new world. Jaden allowed himself the smallest smile. For the first time in his life, no one was accusing him. They were listening. And this time, he was ready to be seen, truly seen. Word of Jaden Carter's mathematical brilliance spread faster than any spring breeze that had ever swept across Crest Hill Middle School. Within days, from noisy lunch tables to locker-lined halls, students buzzed with disbelief in awe of the quiet 13-year-old who had beaten the system with nothing but a pencil and a brilliant mind. And from that, a ripple of change began to rise. Students who once whispered behind his back now approached with hesitant curiosity, asking for help. In the library, a few students formed a self-organized study group they cheekily named Turner Sessions, after Jaden's middle name. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Jaden sat by the window, not to show off, but to teach, to share, to prove that math could be a language for everyone, if only someone was willing to explain it with heart. "How do you remember all these steps?" whispered one boy who used to mock him. Jaden just smiled and slowly wrote on a piece of paper. "Don't try to memorize, try to understand." Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, the atmosphere had shifted too. Conversations once dominated by test scores and discipline policies began to pivot to phrases like hidden potential and that quiet kid might be a genius. Naomi Brooks became a quiet lighthouse in a school beginning to find its way. She proposed a new initiative, SCLF Silent Exceptional Learners Fund, a program designed to identify, nurture, and protect students with extraordinary abilities often overlooked due to social circumstances or personal bias. Principal Monroe backed it wholeheartedly. By the following week, school-wide workshops were launched on anti-bullying, diversity of thought, and inclusive learning. Students who once laughed were now encouraged to speak, not over others, but with reflection. At the next parent assembly, Malik Johnson, the same student who once mocked Jaden's voice, stood up and said, "I was wrong, not because Jaden's smarter than me, but because I wasn't brave enough to admit I laugh at the wrong things just to fit in." The room erupted in applause. But the most moving moment came when Jaden stepped back into his old math classroom, the one that had once belonged to Ms. Hale, now taught by Mr. Marcus, a young teacher from Chicago. There, on the blackboard, written in white chalk, was a single sentence. Every student deserves to be believed in, to be heard, and to grow in their own way. Jaden stood frozen, eyes locked on the words. It wasn't a plaque. It wasn't a headline. But it was change, not just for him, but for every student who would come after. And somewhere in that school, heads that used to stay down were starting to lift, eyes following Jaden and slowly their own potential. 3 weeks after the quiet storm of truth had swept through Crest Hill Middle, Jaden sat in his usual spot in the library, alone. In front of him sat a cream-colored envelope, sealed with the emblem of Franklin University, where Dr. Isaac Coleman taught. Inside was an invitation to the Franklin Future Scholars Summer Program, a prestigious opportunity for exceptional math students across the state. 8 weeks, one life-changing chance. Jaden's fingers hovered over the envelope. He didn't open it right away, because he knew this wasn't just an invitation to a program. This was a doorway, and stepping through it meant leaving behind the shadows he had hidden in for so long. The library door creaked open. Ms. Naomi Brooks walked in, the faint sentiment trailing behind her, carrying that same warm smile that had once saved him. "I heard you got the letter," she said, sitting beside him. Jaden nodded, eyes still fixed on the envelope. "I don't know if I belong. I'm not like the other kids who get into stuff like this. I don't have straight A's. I don't have—" "You have heart," she interrupted gently, "and brilliance, and the kind of grit most adults don't even dream of. Don't let your past set your ceiling. Don't let fear lock up your gift." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You change an entire school with one honest answer and a pencil. Don't ever doubt your worth again." That night, when Jaden got home, his parents were waiting at the kitchen table. His mom, still in her nurse scrubs, eyes tired but shining, smiled softly. His dad, who just set down the steel ruler he'd been using in the garage, looked up with a quiet nod. "Ready to read it together?" his dad asked. Jaden tore the envelope open. The letter was printed on heavy cream paper, bold text across the top. "Congratulations. You've been accepted into the Franklin Future Scholars 8-week summer program." Jaden read the letter aloud. When he finished, his mother clapped gently, tears spilling quietly down her cheeks. "My sweet Jaden, the light has finally found you." His father pulled his chair closer. "Will you go?" Jaden looked into their eyes. He remembered the night spent studying by flashlight, the sting of wooden slaps, the endless misunderstandings. But he also remembered the moment he stood at the board and knew, with certainty, he was right. "I'll go," he said, voice steady like a vow. "Not to prove anything to anyone, but to find myself." In another corner of town, Veronica Hale sat alone, watching the evening news segment about the 13-year-old math prodigy. The screen showed Jaden smiling softly into the camera. She turned off the TV. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel angry, only silent, like someone left standing on a train platform, watching the train named Hope pull away, knowing she had missed it for good. Since her suspension, Veronica's third-floor apartment in Maple Creek had fallen still. Neighbors no longer offered their usual greetings. People passed her in the halls as if she were invisible. The once confident click of her heels, echoing through the school corridors, had long gone quiet. On her table lay a white envelope, stamped with the Monroe County Department of Education seal, the official termination of her teaching contract. Beside it sat a stack of school newspapers, the headline bold across the top, "The Boy Who Changed His School." In the blurred photo, Jaden Carter stood at a whiteboard, pen in hand, eyes unshaken. Even after he had left, his presence remained, like a mirror, reflecting back the flaws in everything Veronica had believed about education for years. That afternoon, a knock sounded at the door. Veronica hesitated before opening it. Standing in front of her was Dr. Isaac Coleman, the man who had once unsettled her with a single question during the school board meeting. "Why are you threatened by a student who knows more?" "Not invited me in?" he asked gently. Veronica nodded and stepped aside, avoiding his gaze. Dr. Coleman took a seat across from her, eyes sharp but not accusatory. "I didn't come to argue," he said calmly. "I came to understand. You were once a respected teacher. What pushed you so far that you raised your hand against a child just because he was more gifted than expected?" Veronica said nothing. She looked out the window, where the sun dipped behind the rooftops of old brick homes. "That boy," she whispered, "he made me feel like I had no control anymore. I always thought students were supposed to obey, to follow procedures, to respect hierarchy. But Jaden didn't. He learned on his own. He didn't need me, and he did it better than I ever could." "You're not envious of your student," Dr. Coleman said slowly. "You're envious of the part of yourself you lost." The word struck like an arrow through years of pride and armor. Veronica looked at him, eyes rimmed with red. "When I was young," she said, "I loved math just like that. But pressure, expectations, they made me choose control over inspiration. I became the kind of teacher I once despised." Dr. Coleman didn't lecture. He simply stood, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and said, "Mistakes aren't endings, Veronica. They're beginnings, if you're brave enough to face them." When the door closed behind him, Veronica sank to the floor, surrounded by half-finished papers and fading sunlight falling on the photo of Jaden still lying on her desk. For the first time in years, she didn't see herself as a teacher, but as someone learning again from her own student. 3 months later, light footsteps echoed to the hallways of the Franklin University Center for Mathematical Sciences. A young black teenager in a gray hoodie and a slung-over backpack moved quietly through the halls. Jaden Carter, now the youngest honor student in Calculus 2, walked into class with a calm focus, like someone who had finally stepped into the world meant for him. At the front, Dr. Isaac Coleman arranged his lecture notes on the podium. When he saw Jaden, he smiled, proud and warm. "Good morning, Mr. Solve Problem 17 in 3 ways," he teased. Laughter rippled through the room, not mocking, but respectful. Jaden gave a small nod and took a seat in the front row, a place he once avoided. Now he claimed it. At Franklin, Jaden's story was no longer just rumor. Near the dean's office, a new mural had been painted. Jaden writing at the board, surrounded by equations and students of all backgrounds learning together. Beneath it read the words, "Every child carries a brilliance, if you're patient enough to see it." The Hidden Talents Initiative was born, led by Naomi Brooks herself, a program built to identify and nurture students with extraordinary potential, no matter their background. By the start of the new school year, over 20 students had received scholarships, advanced classes, and personal mentors. Dozens of teachers volunteered their time. At the start of year assembly, Jaden was invited back to Cresshill Middle School as a guest speaker. He stood at the podium, a folded sheet of notes in his hand, voice steady and strong. "I used to think I had to hide the things I was good at because I was afraid of being noticed, afraid of being punished. But now I know talent isn't something to hide. It's something to share. And so is kindness. I'm not here because I'm better than anyone. I'm here because someone saw me, believed in me, and didn't let me fall." The applause didn't end because Jaden was good at math. It lasted because he proved that courage can come from the quietest among us. That afternoon, Jaden walked out of the auditorium flanked by his parents, a nurse and a construction worker who had quietly given up overtime hours and comforts to help him dream. His father placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You just did something I never even dared to dream of, son." Jaden looked up at the fall sky over Fairlawn, where the golden dusk settled like a whisper, reminding him that anything is possible if you're brave enough to begin. And he had begun.